Hey coders, so in this video we're going to teach you guys how to add radio buttons dynamically. Okay, so basically our program right now, if you hit run, has Bob, Abby, and Caitlin. And eventually what we want to do is be able to remove Bob, Abby, and Caitlin if a store or a waitress or waiter is going to use this app to keep track of the list. Okay, so we're gonna before we can add a remove button, we need to know to be able to remove which person. So let's go ahead and do a few things. First thing we're gonna do is go ahead and rename this. I know that I've been bad at reminding you guys to rename it something proper. So let's go ahead and rename this to today's date. So today's date will be May 1st. So we're just gonna call it array 5/1/2020. Okay. Go ahead and hit save. And then we're going to go to the design tab and let's go ahead and change our design a little bit so that we can support the radio buttons and whatnot. Okay. So I'm on the design tab and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to shrink the canvas a little bit. Okay. We're going to shrink it to the left a little bit and we're going to move it to the right because we want to make room for the radio button. The next thing I want to do is get rid of this gray background because this gray background is going to like look different than the radio button. So if you go here to background color and just put in FFFFF, 6 Fs, and it will be pure white. And then the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and add a button on the bottom. So just go ahead and grab a button here. You can see right here the canvas is just a little bit too big, so make sure that it doesn't cover up the button. So we're going to pull the button down here, try to center it the best we can. Okay, and let's put the word remove on it. And then we're going to actually rename the ID of the button to make something that we would recognize. So let's call it remove button like that. And now we kind of refix our design. So actually, let's go ahead and change that color back real quick. Let's just change it to something. 2, 3, 5, whatever it is. We'll change it back to white in a minute. Oops, I take that back. This is supposed to be black text. So black text is down here, 000. Background color, and let's go and go back to some gray color. Oh, I'm on the wrong thing. Oops. Apply theme. Okay. Go back to the waiting list. I'm sorry. The waiting list has a background color of FFF. Let's go ahead and change it back to gray real quick so we can help see our buttons a little bit before we go ahead and turn it down to 0. We'll come back and make it white later. So in our code, okay, the first thing I want to address is actually a bug in the program. I'm surprised that no one used the program enough to recognize that there's a bug in our code. So let me show you where the bug is. If you hit run right now, we have Bob, Abby, and Caitlin. And we took care of most of the cases. If the user doesn't put in anything, no name, give an error message. If the user puts in something that is not a number, give it says invalid number. Well, what if, and then you assume that once we get here, numbers will be less than 0, between 0 and the length of the list, and if it's greater than the length of the list, I'll add it to the back of the list. There's one particular case we forgot. So here is an example. Suppose I want to add Stephen to the back of this list. Where do you expect it to happen? Where is Stephen going to be added? I have nothing on the waiting list right now. So according to this, nothing should not be a number. But if I hit add, Stephen gets added to the beginning of the list. So even though the number is nothing, it did not print out this error message. So isNaN only worked for something that have letters in it. So let me show you again. Let's say if I want to put in Enrique, but I do put in something that's not a number, it's going to say error invalid number. Okay, just like we said it would. Okay, so nothing is apparently a valid number. So let's go ahead and fix this real quick. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this code and we're going to enter a few spaces. And we have to check for the case that number is equal to nothing. And then we're going to do some code. So like I said, what did you expect to happen when I put in Steven? He's supposed to get added to the back of the list. Well, we have code that does that. It's right here. Code that puts things to the back of the list. So we're going to copy this and paste it here. Okay. All right. So now if the number is nothing, it's going to add to the list. Otherwise, it should do this. So this should not be an if. This should be a else if. So now it does it properly. So if there is no number, it should add it to the back of the list. Let's go ahead and run our program and test this. So now if I put Steven, he gets added to the back of the list. If I put in something that's not a number, or not a number, sorry, it should say invalid number. So now if I put in something like, okay, let's put in -5, Enrique gets added into the beginning of the list. If I put Francisco and I put in something like 4, I should be able to add him to the middle of the list. And lastly, let's go Gerardo. If I add him to a bigger number like 78, it should add Gerardo to the back of the list. Okay, so that just fixes a bug. Let's go ahead and clean this up. All right. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually shrink our code. Do you guys notice that we have update waiting list here, update waiting list here, and update waiting list here, and update waiting list here with the set text? Well, this means this set text should be included inside of update waiting list. Why would I continue to copy this here over and over again? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually cut this out and put it inside of update waiting list. So I'm going to put it at the back of it. So I'm not going to put it inside the for loop, but on the end of update waiting list, it's going to reset this to nothing and reset this to nothing. So now I can shrink my code and clean it up a little bit. I can get rid of all the set texts because it's already going to do that inside of my update list. Okay. So now this kind of shrinks my code down to the set texts to get rid of that and cleans up my code just a little bit. Okay. Let's talk about the next thing we're going to do. So our goal, again, to our today's exercise is to add radio buttons here so that later on when we hit the remove button, it will remove Bob, Amy, and Caitlin, or whoever we clicked on, off the list. So you could have gone to design like this, right? This is what you could have done. You could have taken a radio button and put it here. And you could have taken another radio button and put it here. And you could take another radio button and put it here. And if the list is 100 long, well, you have to put about 100 of these, right? This is all stupid. Do not do this. So I'm going to go ahead and delete all the radio buttons. Okay. If computer science, if you ever feel like you're doing something way too repetitively, you probably should put it inside a loop. So that's what I'm going to teach you today. We're going to make radio buttons by dynamically. Okay, dynamically, meaning that when the list gets created, it's going to add a radio button as people are being added to the list, and it's going to remove radio buttons as we remove people off the list. So let's talk about how we're going to do that. The first thing we're going to do is actually, you see this function that we created called update waiting list, and then we call it one time so that it actually creates the list when the program starts. Well, this isn't really updating. This is called initializing. So I don't want to get too confused because there's a difference between initializing the list and updating the list. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy and paste this function. Okay, we're going to copy it and we're going to paste it. So now there's two of them, but we're going to change one of them to initialize. So, and instead of calling the update waiting list, because we're not really updating, we're initializing, we're going to delete this and we're going to copy this name and call it right after we make it. So I made the function, I used a function. So basically, this just did whatever this did. But here's another thing that we could clean up. Look at this. Did we need to set text of the name input and the name number input to blank? No, because we didn't add anything. We didn't put the text into here. So we can actually delete this out. This doesn't make sense to be here because initializing these things are already blank. All right, so let's talk about how to make a radio button. So inside of UI controls, you have a function called radio button right here. So let's go ahead and pull that in. So I just pulled it underneath initialize waiting list. So what does it do? It has an ID, means the name of the button you want to create, and false, meaning that is the radio button checked or not. And false means unchecked, true means checked. And then group. Basically, radio buttons control in a sense that only one person in a group at any time could be checked. So if I click on radio button 2, radio button 1 will be unchecked. If I go back and click on radio button 1, radio button 2 gets unchecked. So this is how that mechanic works. So let's go ahead and hit the run button and see what happens when I pull this command in. You see this button up here in the upper left? Well, that's that radio button right here. Well, this is not where I want it. Let's go ahead and move it where I want it. Okay, so this is why I told you guys to leave the background. So let's go ahead and move it somewhere around here. So if I hit the reset here and I use my cursor, my radio button should be somewhere around here, right? So it's about, I don't know, 30 and 170. Let's try that. So how do I make the radio button go to 30 and 170? That's called the set position. So if you guys scroll down here, there's a set position that takes in the ID, the X, Y, width, and height. And I think width and height are optional. It says right here, optionally sets the width and the height for the element. So we're just going to use the 3 argument version here. We're going to set ID, since it's ID right here, to 0, 0, 100, and 100. Okay, well we're not going to use 100 and 100. We're going to delete that. But we are going to use a location. I think I said 30 and 170. Hit run. Okay, I'm a little bit off. It's going to be a little bit to the left, so let's make it 25. And it needs a little bit up. So let's go like 168 or something. And maybe a little bit more to the left. Let's go 23, something like that. So there you have it. So now I have a radio button for the first position, Bob. And I think I can go up a little bit higher. Not to be completely OCD here. But yes, now I have a radio button there. Well, I want to make a radio button how many times? Well, I'm not going to make 100 of them. And I only want to make it what? 3 times. Well, 3 times. What if the list is 4? Well, then it's going to be 4 times. What if the list is 5? Well, I'm going to make 5 radio buttons. I have to make as many radio buttons as there are people on the list. So why am I doing that code here when I can be doing it inside the loop? So I'm actually going to copy and paste these code and put it inside the loop. So this for loop, if you remember, makes and puts in the names of the people inside this list. So while it's doing that, it should also create a radio button and put it inside 3 times. So let's go ahead and hit reset and hit run. Oh, wait a minute. How come I have a button down here and 2 buttons over here? Well, the problem is we created 3 buttons with all of the same name, ID, ID. But each radio button should have its own unique name. Well, what should we name it? Well, how about we call this radio button 0? Because when it was created, I was 0. And how about we call this radio button that should be over here, radio button 1? Because when I is 1, that's when that button was created. And how about this button right here? Well, this button should be what? Radio button number 2, because that's what happened when I was equal to 2. So instead of just calling it ID, let's just give it a better name than this. Let's call it RB, because radio buttons, right? And call it RB. And not just RB, but RB plus the letter I. So what this does, and I'll show you guys using the console log, is it will create a radio button called RB0, RB1, and RB2. So let's go ahead and show you what it looks like. So let's go ahead and give ourselves a debugging function that just console logs something. And we're just going to paste this thing. Okay. We're copying RB1 or RB0, RB1, RB2. And then we're going to add to the back of it RB1, and we're just going to put the word created. Okay, something like that. So when it gets created, it should spit out to the console log that it was created. Let's go ahead and hit reset and hit run. Okay. So you can see our code right here. It says RB0 created, RB1 created, and RB2 created. Okay. And oops, this should not be a 1. This should be an I. Sorry. Let's go ahead and hit reset and hit run. So now we have 3 radio buttons, RB0, RB1, and RB2. But where is the button? Well, it's on top of each other because I set it to the same position. Should it be in the same position? No, only the first button should be here, but the second and third buttons, RB1 and RB2, should be a couple pixels downward. Well, how do we do that? Well, we're going to add some value to the 167, which is the Y value. Well, what are we going to add? I don't know, 15 pixels? But if I add 15 pixels like this, well, that just means everybody's going to be at whatever 182 is, right? So they're all going to be moved there. Well, how about we add 15 pixels times the value of I? So when I is 1, it's going to add 15. When I is 0, it's not going to add anything. And when I is 2, it's going to add 30 pixels. So we're going to take 15, and we should put it inside parentheses. Remember your orders of operation. Times I. So this is no longer going to be just 167. It's going to be 167, 182, 197, because it's going to use this value to update the position. Let's go ahead and hit reset and hit run. And now we have created a radio button for how long this list is. 3 radio buttons for 3 people on the list. Mr. Wynn. What if we add some more people to the list? Let's try adding Steven to the back of the list. What happened? Nothing. The only time we create radio buttons is when the initial list is being created. Well, where else do we have to add a radio button? Well, whenever the user presses the add button and a button gets added. So if you go down to the add button on event command, where in this code should we add a radio button? Well, we should add a radio button not when there's an error. Here, when we push a name to the back of the list. Not here, because that's an error. Here, when a number is less than 0, and we put a number to the front of the list. Here, when a person puts in a number between 0 and the less than the length of the list. And down here, when the person gets added to the back of the list. So these 4 places is where we have to add a radio button. So to make the code cleaner, let's just go ahead and make a function called add radio button. Okay. And we're just going to call it right now. We're not going to make it yet. So we're just going to use this code. So whenever we should add a radio button, we're going to call this function called add radio button. So I'm going to add it here, not here, not here, down here, down here, and down here. Okay. So obviously right now it's giving me these little yellow triangles because we haven't created this yet. But let's go ahead and create it right now. So to create a function, we type in the word function. We're going to use Control V to paste the word add radio button. And then instead of using a semicolon, we're going to actually put up open braces left and right to define what to do when you want to add a radio button. So how do we add a radio button? Well, we did this already. We did it up here when we created the initialize waiting list right here. We created it with these 2 lines of code, and this code just helps us kind of track what's going on. Let's go ahead and copy these 3 lines and paste it here. This is how we create a radio button. But here's the problem. When we were creating the radio button here, we had this I, where I is 0, 1, 2, 3, whatever this list is making. Down here, we don't have I. I doesn't exist. Instead, where are we going to add? So look at this example. We have RB0, RB2, and RB3. When someone hit the add button for Steven, what button should have been created? Well, RB3. Oh, well, what if there were 3 people, and let's say I add in another name, like Jackson. Well, what button should this be? Well, RB0, RB1, RB2, RB3, RB4 should have been created. We're always going to add to the back of the radio button list. So whatever this number is 1 number less than it. So if my list is 5 people long, this button should be RB4. If my list is 3 people long, like Bob, Abby, and Caitlin, this should be RB2. So instead of putting I, we're going to use the length of the waiting list. So it's going to be, if I remember correctly, waiting list dot length minus 1. Now remember, this is all one number. Waiting list minus 1. So I'm going to copy this, waiting list minus 1 with the parentheses around it, and paste it over here and over here. So basically, I'm going to create a waiting list with the name RB and whatever the waiting list is minus 1. So in this case, 5 people, RB4. Add another person, 6 people, the radio button will be RB5. Now here's one more error right here. You see this I over here? Well, this I, again, is only for the loop. We're going to copy and paste this with waiting list minus 1. So now let's go ahead and run our program. So I have 3 people and 3 radio buttons. If I add in a name, it's going to add RB3 because the list is 4, RB3 gets created. Well, let's add someone in the middle just in case to see if our code is working. Let's say I add Enrique in position 3. Enrique gets added at this position, but the button that gets created is this button, and it's going to be called RB4. Let's try one more thing. Let's just try, I don't know, David, and let's go put him at the front of the list. Let's put him at position 1. And we created RB5. Okay, so this is the entire program. Okay, I know it's kind of hard to follow because we kind of started, we deleted some, we cleaned some up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down real nice and slow, and you guys will probably have to use your Chromebook, take a screenshot of this, or maybe take a picture with your phone to help you write the code if you're not following along, and not understanding what we're writing. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll you guys. This is the top of the program. So initializing waiting list is right here. Updating the waiting list, which is a little bit different. Adding a radio button when someone hits the add button. And lastly, here, the add button one. And we actually shortened add button a little bit by condensing some of that extra junk code that we did not need. Okay, so I'm going to here and go ahead and take a picture with your phone or something in case you didn't follow. I'm going to give you guys 2 days to do this. So I'm going to give you today and Monday to produce this program. Take a screenshot of this for me and then send it in on Monday for credit for Friday and Monday. Okay, and I will see you guys.